Last week, something happened that fundamentally damaged the reputation of Ethereum. Ethereum is built on the story that decentralized finance will replace a lot of the functions that currently traditional finance is doing. But then came along a hack of a DeFi protocol most people have never heard of, Kelp DAO. Kelp DAO got hacked, and that led to a spillover effect to the largest decentralized finance protocols. Like Aave, for example. Aave saw outflows of more of $10 billion. And the big question is this potentially an opportunity not to just buy Ethereum, because now everybody is so bearish, but to potentially also buy a lot of the altcoins, because many altcoins are highly coupled with Ethereum. Ethereum goes up, many altcoins go up as well, directly or indirectly, so directly through liquidity pools or indirectly simply because of correlation. But also, doesn't it simply make sense to do the opposite of what most other people tend to do? Here is the TVL, the total value locked of decentralized finance in all of crypto. And this here was the Kelp DAO hack. This is the TVL for Aave, the largest borrowing and lending platform in decentralized finance. And it saw a massive crash from 26 billion prior to the hack to now 15 billion of capital that's on the platform. And some sources point towards North Korea being potentially the trigger for that exploit. Now, the market as a whole has been recovering in the last few days, but that's not necessarily driven by Ethereum. When you look at Ethereum compared to other cryptocurrencies, especially Bitcoin, it's actually not doing that well. Here's an interesting tweet. Apparently, there had been very little spot accumulation, but the price of Ethereum went up anyway, potentially because of derivative bets. Let's have a look at the derivatives very long term. This is the open interest. So how many bets are currently being made on Ethereum? The chart starts 6 years ago. We can see how open interest tended to grow much more than the Ethereum price. So here is the Ethereum price. It topped at very similar levels at the end of 2021, the end of 2025, but open interest during that time grew much more. So there's now much more speculative investment in Ethereum. The market has fundamentally changed. There used to be just spot trading, people buying and selling various crypto assets. Now, most trading volume for most assets happens on the perpetual futures. The perpetual futures tend to have less trading fees, but they also make it very expensive to hold a position very long term. And that's because of the funding rate. Now, interestingly enough, the funding rate for Ethereum has rather turned neutral since the beginning of February of this year. So the average short-term speculator isn't that bullish on ETH anymore. Have a look at this. And this is Ethereum dominance. So this looks at how much of all of crypto in terms of market cap is currently in Ethereum. It's a quite good measure to try to figure out if Ethereum currently outperforms or underperforms. Is the idiosyncratic risk of getting into Ethereum versus just a broad basket of cryptocurrencies worth it? We can see that since the middle of April of last year, Ethereum outperformed very nicely. That's when the story around Ethereum treasury companies popped up. That's when Tom Lee of BitMine started to accumulate Ethereum. But that momentum has shifted since the end of August of last year. Since then, Ethereum tends to underperform and is in a relatively constant downward trend. Interestingly enough, the chart of Ethereum relative to Bitcoin looks very similar. When we look at all of those companies that acquire Ethereum long-term, BitMine is of course at number 1. But you can also see that it has already reached 76% of its target accumulation. The big question is, will BitMine still continue to buy ETH once that target has been reached? Tom Lee already got asked in interviews about this, and he's not directly answering it, but it seems to hint that the purchases will move towards other vehicles once the 5% mark has been reached. So that's not good, and that points towards potentially a further slowdown of the accumulation. The accumulation is already slowing down since September of last year, and that might explain why we now have the underperformance of ETH versus Bitcoin. Because the accumulation in ETH across all of those companies is slowing down. It's not slowing down though for the Bitcoin treasury companies, which is of course mainly led by Michael Saylor's strategy. So the other companies, they have slowed down their purchases, but MicroStrategy continues to buy. and that leads to Bitcoin outperforming Ethereum. Have a look at the total value locked on Ethereum. So how much capital is currently used in decentralized finance on the Ethereum blockchain? This is now in US dollars. We peaked at very similar levels in September of last year compared to the height of the DeFi summer, November of 2021. When we measure that TVL in Ethereum, we can see a quite hard top, close to 27 million ETH. We've come down very sharply again because of the Kelp DAO hack. Momentum is currently negative and decentralized finance now gets another risk premium set on top of it. We need to have at least a minimum return of 10-20% APY in order to justify all the risk of getting hacked in decentralized finance. The risk is likely increasing over time because AI can find vulnerabilities much faster now. Now, we started this video with the correlation of Ethereum to the altcoins. Ethereum goes up, the altcoins tend to go up. When Ethereum goes down, the altcoins tend to go down. Now, this connection in price movements between Ethereum and the altcoins is stronger compared to Bitcoin and the altcoins. Still, there are times when Ethereum is comparatively more expensive and when the altcoins are comparatively more expensive. What we're looking at here is the Ethereum price relative to the altcoin market cap. So that's the measure of others. The dotted line, that's the average. This chart starts in the middle of 2018. So we are in a somewhat constant trading range and we are now bang on that average. Ethereum is not necessarily expensive versus the alts. It's not necessarily cheap versus the alts. Very likely going to move in similar directions to the altcoins. The correlation is likely going to hold. In other words, if Ethereum continues to underperform, if this is going down, then very likely many altcoins will also underperform Bitcoin in the near future. Now, that's not necessarily bad news. Most people think that the real way to make money in crypto is to find the perfect altcoin and then see this do 10 or 20 or 30x. But I think that's pretty much like buying a lottery ticket. It's very hard to find out what altcoin will rally next. It is much easier though to find out which altcoin will underperform. It's the altcoins that have very high token inflation, that see new tokens hitting the market all the time, where the venture capitalists cash out, where the influencers cash out. And when we are in an environment where altcoins in general underperform Bitcoin anyways, we can take advantage of that. We can bet on falling prices of altcoins while at the same time betting on rising prices of Bitcoin. We can play that delta. I'm playing this delta already for the last 5 years. This is my trading portfolio over time. On average, I make a bit over 2% alpha per month, but of course there is some volatility. And so I also started a copy trading vault. That was at the beginning of the year. It's currently more than 10% in profit. Last year we got 44% annualized and we are currently more than on track to achieve the same again. So if you want to get more information, feel free to check out the link below, right? thebitcoinstrategy.com. There is a video that explains exactly what I do, and you can simply do the same kind of trades as I announced them. You can just copy the strategy, or if you're lazy, if you don't want to do all the manual work yourself, again, there is the automated copy trading vault as well. As usual, thanks for watching. If you got some value, feel free to give this a like. If it's your very first time here, feel free to subscribe as well. I publish videos regularly. See you next time on YouTube or see you on Premium. Cheers.